My mother threw a glass of water in my face at a five-star restaurant because I refused to give my credit card to my freeloading brother. She said, "Give it to him or get out." So I got out. I didn't know then he was already forging my signature, opening a fake charity in my name, stealing donations and using my face to sell a lie. The FBI knocked, but karma knocked harder. I'm Ethan Carter, and this is the story of how I lost everything then took it all back. The restaurant buzzed with the hum of soft jazz and clinking silverware. I adjusted the collar of my shirt as I walked past a line of tables, the hostess guiding me toward the private dining room where my family was already seated. It was one of those upscale places in Seattle, the kind of spot Mom adored, where wine glasses sparkled and everything cost more than it should. Mom sat at the head of the table, flawless as ever in her navy silk blouse, her silver hair pulled into a tight chignon. Mason was to her right, dressed like he had just stepped off a college frat house porch, backwards cap and all. Despite being 25 and supposedly a marketing intern somewhere downtown. My seat, as always, was at the far end, a symbolic reminder that while I was part of this family, I was also somehow always just adjacent to it. I took my seat and nodded politely. Mom barely looked up from her menu. Mason smirked and gave me one of his condescending little nods, the kind he used when he thought he was being clever. Dinner had barely started before he launched into his usual monologue about how hard life was for a young creative in this economy. I sipped my water and waited for the punchline, and it came. Midway through the appetizer, he leaned back in his chair, flicked a piece of bread off his plate and said casually, "Hey, Ethan, I was thinking maybe you could give me access to one of your credit cards. Just for essentials. Rent, maybe some client lunches. You know, business stuff." I blinked slowly. The way he said it in front of Mom, in front of our family friends who joined us for this little celebration, like it was the most normal request in the world. Like I was just some kind of walking ATM. I set my fork down, careful, controlled. I looked him straight in the eye. "Mason, I'm not comfortable with that. I've helped you out plenty over the years. It's time you manage your own finances." His expression faltered for half a second. Just half a second. Then he turned dramatically to Mom. "You see, this is what I'm talking about. Every time I ask for something reasonable, Ethan acts like I'm some kind of freeloader." Mom's eyes narrowed, her lips tightened into that thin line she reserved for situations she found personally offensive. She turned to me slowly, as if weighing her words. "You make more money than you know what to do with, Ethan. What's the harm in helping your brother?" "It's not about harm," I said, trying to stay calm. "It's about responsibility, boundaries. He needs to grow up." There was a pause. Not long, just long enough for the silence to become heavy. Then Mom reached for her glass. Before I could react, the cold splash of water hit my face. It wasn't dramatic like in the movies. It wasn't even loud. It was silent, sharp, humiliating. Everyone froze. The waiter 2 tables down stopped mid-step. One of the guests stifled a gasp. Mason turned away, pretending to be embarrassed, but I caught the corner of his mouth twitching. I wiped my face slowly with my napkin, not looking at anyone. My heart pounded not from anger, but from disbelief. There were no words, not in that moment. What could I possibly say that wouldn't make me look weak or petty? I stood up my chair, scraping against the hardwood floor. I could feel their eyes on me, their judgment, their pity, maybe even their satisfaction. I didn't say a word. I walked out of that room, out of that restaurant, out of that version of myself who still gave a damn what they thought. The night air was cool against my skin as I stepped onto the sidewalk. I didn't wipe the water from my shirt. Let them see it. Let the whole damn city see it. That dinner wasn't just a dinner, it was a line in the sand, and I had finally stepped over it. Rain had started to fall by the time I reached the parking lot, I didn't bother running to the car. The water mixed with the remnants on my shirt, cold and grounding. As I sat behind the wheel, hands resting on the leather steering wheel, my mind drifted not to the restaurant, not to the sting of the water, not even to Mason's smug face, but to the year everything had started unraveling. 2022, the year Dad died. His name was William Carter, founder of Carter Foods, a regional food distribution company based out of Spokane. He built it from the ground up, starting with a single truck and a rented warehouse. By the time I was old enough to understand what he did for a living, he already had 3 regional offices and contracts with every major grocery chain west of the Rockies. I grew up in that world, in the smell of refrigerated storage and the clatter of forklifts. When he got sick, everything stopped. Pancreatic cancer, aggressive and fast. He was gone in 8 months. Just like that. No dramatic farewell, no long goodbyes. Just a quiet exit and a mountain of unfinished business. I was the only one who stepped in. Mason was still partying his way through an extended gap year that had stretched into 3. And Mom Linda was more concerned with planning memorial brunches and hiring PR firms than looking at ledgers. The company was in bad shape. A supplier lawsuit, outdated infrastructure, mounting debt. The banks were circling. Employees were scared. I moved back from Chicago within a week of the funeral. I didn't ask anyone. I just did it. For the next year and a half, I lived in spreadsheets, conference calls, supplier meetings, union negotiations. I renegotiated contracts, shut down unprofitable branches, restructured the executive team, and absorbed the fallout from 2 regional managers quitting. It was brutal. I slept in the office most weeks, ate vending machine snacks, and watched my savings bleed out, covering short-term payroll gaps. And where were they? Linda showed up for board photos and ribbon cuttings. Mason managed the company's Instagram for 3 weeks, then gave up because it was too corporate. But in public, they made it sound like we were rebuilding the company together. Mom gave interviews where she referred to herself as the matriarch of a legacy. Mason told some local podcast he was head of innovation. Neither had ever opened a financial report. What burned the most wasn't that they weren't there. It was that they pretended they were. I remember one staff meeting, spring 2023. I was presenting our recovery plan. Everyone looked exhausted but hopeful. We had just landed a major contract with a hospital system. It was a turning point. Mason barged in halfway through the meeting uninvited, with some influencer friend trailing behind him holding a camera. He said he was filming content for a docu-series on family business resilience. I told him to leave. He laughed and asked if I was still mad about Christmas. I looked at the faces of the team, the people who had stayed through the worst. I saw the embarrassment in their eyes, the confusion. That was the moment I knew this wasn't just neglect. It was sabotage in a tailored hoodie. Linda wasn't much better. She would host cocktail parties in the executive lounge and gush to investors about our bold new era, never once mentioning the layoffs or the 2 loans I personally co-signed to keep the trucks running. She had a way of making people believe her version of things, of rewriting the past while it was still happening. Slowly, decisions stopped going through me. A few board members, old friends of Dad who owed Linda more than they admitted, started looping Mason into meetings. Then I started getting uninvited. HR shifted without my input. Marketing made a rebrand proposal I'd never seen before. When I asked about it, Linda said they were streamlining the chain of command. I was the CEO on paper, but I could feel the walls tightening. One night I came back to the office after dinner and found my keycard deactivated. The security guard had to let me in manually. He looked at me like he didn't know whether to apologize or call someone. I said nothing. I went to my desk, opened my laptop, and started drafting my resignation letter. I didn't send it. Not yet. but it sat there for weeks, a quiet reminder. Still I held on, for the team, for the memory of Dad, for whatever scraps of integrity I thought I was preserving. I told myself that the work mattered more than the politics, that the company was bigger than them, that someday they'd see what I did and acknowledge it, but they never did. Mason started showing up to investor dinners. Linda floated his name as future leadership. They began introducing him as VP of Strategic Development, a title that didn't exist until they made it up for him. My voice got quieter, my presence smaller. Eventually, I was only copied on emails out of courtesy, if that. And now here we were. The same brother who treated the company like a social club was asking me for my credit card in front of strangers. The same mother who pushed me out of the business I saved had poured water on me like I was an ungrateful guest. I leaned back in the driver's seat, staring at my own reflection in the rearview mirror. I didn't look like a man in control. I looked tired, faded. The city lights outside blurred with the raindrops on the windshield. I turned the ignition, but I didn't drive. For the first time in a long time, I let the silence stay. I let the memories rise, not to haunt me, but to remind me of what I'd done, of what they'd taken, and of what was still mine. Some debts don't show up on balance sheets, and some accounts aren't settled in dollars. The glow of my phone lit up the passenger seat. I hadn't noticed it buzzing through the soft thrum of rain and my own spiraling thoughts. When the screen flashed again, I leaned over and picked it up. One new email. No subject. Just a sender I hadn't seen in over a year. Robert Grayson. The name alone made my grip tighten. He had been my father's attorney for over 2 decades. Quiet, calculated, the kind of man who never said more than necessary. The last time I saw him was at Dad's funeral. He had taken me aside, said something cryptic about things needing time, that everything would fall into place when it should. I had chalked it up to grief or lawyer speak. But now this. I tapped the message open. Ethan. If you are reading this, then I have determined the time is appropriate. There is a matter regarding your father's estate that we must discuss in person. Discretion is critical. Please come by my office this Friday at 3 p.m. No one else must know. Grayson. No signature, no legal letterhead, just that flat professional tone that always made me feel like I was being observed, not addressed. I stared at the message, heart thudding in that low, unsettled way it did when something familiar suddenly twisted out of alignment. An entire year had passed since Dad died. The will had supposedly been settled. Linda had been vocal about everything being transferred, liquidated, and reorganized. There had been paperwork, legal documents, tax filings. So what the hell was Grayson talking about? I pulled into my driveway without remembering the drive home. The house was dark except for the porch light. I killed the engine and sat in the quiet, the email still open on my screen. Something was off. I thought back to the weeks after the funeral. Linda had taken control immediately. She said Dad wanted things simple, quick, clean. I was grieving, exhausted, buried in the company crisis. I hadn't asked questions. I just signed the damn documents they put in front of me. Maybe that had been the first mistake. But if Grayson had something more, something hidden, then that mistake might be reversible. I spent the next hour sitting in my home office rereading the message, going through old files. I pulled up the digital copies of the estate settlement, the power of attorney, the transition agreements. All of them had Linda's fingerprints. Mason's name only appeared once on a bank transfer approval. My name technically was still listed as interim CEO, but I hadn't made a decision in months. Grayson's email didn't promise anything, but it didn't have to. The fact that it existed at all meant that someone had lied, or at least omitted the truth. I poured a glass of water and sat back in my chair. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I considered replying, asking what this was about, demanding clarification. But something stopped me. Grayson didn't deal in vagueness unless he had to. If he wanted this face-to-face, it meant paper wasn't safe. Phones weren't safe. That made it real, that made it dangerous. I looked around the room, bookshelves, framed photos, the old leather chair Dad used to sit in when he visited. The company logo still etched on the whiskey decanter he gave me after my first quarter running logistics. I had spent so long trying to hold together a legacy that might never have been mine to protect. And maybe, just maybe, that was about to change. Friday was 3 days away. That gave me time. Time to think, time to watch, and time to prepare. If the past year had taught me anything, it was this. Silence wasn't safety. It was strategy. And I wasn't going to be quiet anymore. Not if this was what I thought it might be. Not if he had left me something. Not if I still had a right to it. The next morning felt heavier than usual. I moved through the kitchen like a shadow, making coffee I barely tasted, scanning through old emails like they might suddenly rearrange themselves into answers. Nothing had changed on paper, but something inside me had. There was a shift now, subtle but irreversible. That email from Grayson cracked the surface. Everything else underneath it was waiting to be uncovered. I hadn't spoken to Mom in weeks, not since the board meeting fiasco when she mistakenly excluded me from a vote on new warehouse contracts. Her excuse had been a software glitch. Mine was pretending I believed her. The truth was simpler. She didn't see me as part of the family business anymore. Maybe not even part of the family. The rot in our relationship wasn't sudden. It had grown over years, fed by control pride and unspoken disappointment. She loved order, image, obedience. I brought complication. I questioned things. I remembered things. That made me inconvenient. With Mason, it was always different. He knew exactly how to play her. He didn't push. He flattered, joked, needed. He weaponized vulnerability like a scalpel, always just broken enough to earn sympathy, never broken enough to require effort. She loved rescuing him, and he loved needing her right up until he didn't. Sometimes I wondered if she even realized how much he manipulated her. Other times I wasn't so sure he needed to. Maybe she liked being lied to as long as it sounded flattering. After lunch, I pulled out a file I hadn't looked at in months. Property titles. I had requested a full portfolio audit after Dad died just to understand what was actually owned under Carter Holdings. The numbers didn't make sense back then. Now they made even less. The lake house in Idaho, the downtown condo in Spokane, even the farmland in Grant County. Everything was listed under Carter Family Trust on the surface, but the trust manager had been changed 6 months after Dad passed, to Linda. No co-trustee, no oversight. There had never been a board discussion, no memo, no family meeting. Just a quiet transfer, notarized and filed with my signature somehow included. I stared at that page like it might rewrite itself. I hadn't signed that form. I never would have. I remembered where I was that day, neck-deep in a logistics crisis in Eugene. I hadn't even seen the property list, let alone approved changes to it. My phone buzzed. A number I didn't recognize but vaguely familiar. I let it ring. Then a text followed. Ethan, it's Sabrina. I need to talk. It's about your name being used. Mason's involved. Please don't ignore this. The words punched straight through me. I hadn't seen Sabrina in over a year. We didn't part on bad terms exactly, just different paths, different needs. She worked in nonprofit development, smart, practical, heart-led. We had loved each other like people who knew it wouldn't last but didn't want to admit it yet. I called her back immediately. She answered on the second ring. Hey, Thanks for picking up. Look, this is going to sound insane, but I figured you'd want to hear it from me. What's going on? I asked. You're listed as the founder of a new foundation, the Carter Youth Initiative. We were approached for a partnership last week. On paper, it looks legitimate. Clean branding registered as a 501c3 even has a mission statement tied to food insecurity and youth outreach. But the director, Mason. I closed my eyes. My jaw clenched. That son of a bitch. Yeah, Sabrina continued, it gets worse. The registration lists you as the primary donor and chair of the board. They used your digital signature. I compared it to some old forms from when we worked on that fundraiser together. It's forged, but it's convincing. How public is this? Pretty public. He's been doing media interviews, claimed it's your way of giving back while stepping away from business, said your dad's passing inspired a change of heart. I stood up and began pacing the room. The audacity, the danger. This wasn't just personal now. This was legal. This was fraud. Do you have the paperwork? I asked. Yes. I pulled everything from the registration database. I can send it to you in an hour. But Ethan, this thing is getting traction. They're applying for grants, public money. If you don't shut it down fast, it's going to fall on you. I know. We sat in silence for a moment. Then she added softly, I'm sorry. I don't know why he'd do this, but I had to tell you. You did the right thing. Thank you. We hung up. I stared out the window, the city skyline just barely visible through the fog. My reflection ghosted in the glass. I didn't see a man anymore. I saw a target. Mason wasn't just trying to edge me out. He was replacing me, rewriting me, using my name to build his own empire of lies with Mom nodding proudly beside him. I opened a new folder on my laptop. I labeled it simply Evidence. It was time to start documenting. Quietly, precisely. Like Dad used to say, trust is good, but records are better. And if Mason wanted to wear my skin like a mask, he'd better be ready for what came next. Friday afternoon came cold and quiet. Gray clouds loomed low over the city, casting long shadows on the downtown buildings as I stepped into the tall glass tower where Grayson's law firm had been. For as long as I could remember. Everything about the building felt sterile, deliberate, timeless, just like him. The receptionist didn't ask who I was. She simply stood as I approached and gestured toward the hallway without a word. Grayson's door was already open. He sat behind a dark oak desk, not a single paper out of place, dressed in the same charcoal suit he wore to my father's funeral. He didn't smile, but he did rise as I entered. Ethan, thank you for coming. Mr. Grayson, please, sit. The door clicked shut behind me as I took the leather chair opposite him. He waited for a beat as if weighing whether to speak, then reached into a locked drawer and placed a plain white envelope on the table. My name was written across the front in my father's handwriting. I knew it instantly. Block letters, confident, steady. He slid it toward me. This is a copy. The original is in our firm's vault, name-stamped, witnessed, and sealed per your father's request. He instructed that this not be revealed until I determined the conditions he specified had been met. What conditions? That you were no longer actively involved in company leadership. That control had shifted. That your legal and financial access had been either revoked or restricted. He predicted it might come to that. I stared at the envelope for a long moment before I picked it up and opened it. It was short, just a single page. I, William Carter, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare the following to be my final will and testament. I leave full ownership and controlling interest of Carter Foods, Inc. to my son, Ethan Carter. I also leave the Lake House property in Coeur d'Alene to Ethan Carter. I leave no corporate assets or property to Mason Carter. I believe he lacks the judgment and discipline required to maintain the integrity of the company. Linda Carter is to receive her previously agreed-upon personal inheritance separate from the business. In the event that these wishes are contested or obstructed, I authorize Robert Grayson to act on my behalf in enforcing this directive through legal means. I trust Ethan will know when to act. Signed, William Carter. Dated September 2nd, 2022. My throat tightened. I didn't speak. I couldn't. Grayson waited, then finally said, "He asked me to hold this until you were ready. And unfortunately, I believe now is that time." I set the letter down and leaned back. They lied to everyone. Yes, they forged documents, locked me out, used my name for things I never approved. Yes. He didn't even mention Mason, not once, not even as a footnote. Your father was a deeply rational man. He observed patterns. He saw Mason's nature for what it was, even if your mother refused to. And the lake house still under the trust. But with this will, you have every legal right to claim it, quietly if you prefer. I've already begun the process of verifying the deed chain. There are discrepancies. Of course there are. I stared at the document again. So simple. So clean. No room for ambiguity. He had seen this coming. All of it. The takeover, the manipulation, the erasure. He had trusted me to finish what he couldn't. "I'm not ready to take this public yet," I said. "I thought you might say that. I need to know what they're planning. I need to watch, and I want to burn it down slowly." Grayson gave the closest thing he could to approval, the faintest nod. "Then I'll proceed discreetly. You'll hear from me in a week. Use this time wisely." I folded the letter and slipped it into my coat. It felt heavier than it should, like it carried not just ink but legacy truth, a quiet weapon waiting for the right moment. Outside, the wind had picked up. The first drops of rain spattered across the pavement as I walked back to my car. I didn't go home. I drove. Out of the city, past the suburbs, onto the highway that led east, toward the lake house. I hadn't been there since the funeral. I didn't even know if the keys still worked, but suddenly I needed to see it, to know that it was still mine, that something my father built hadn't been poisoned. The road stretched long ahead of me. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't running. I was returning. The lake house stood at the edge of the water like it had for decades, unmoved by storms or memory. I unlocked the door without knowing if the key would still fit. It did. The silence inside wrapped around me like an old coat. Dust covered the hardwood floors. The scent of cedar and lake air lingered untouched by time. I stood in the foyer for a long time, letting it settle over me. This place had been my father's retreat. His quiet. Now it was mine. I didn't plan to stay long, but something in me needed to be there to feel grounded before what I sensed was coming. I didn't have to wait long. The call came the next morning. "Mr. Carter, this is Special Agent Thomas with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We need to speak with you in regard to a financial matter that has recently come under federal scrutiny. Are you available to meet in Seattle within the next 48 hours? The air left my lungs like a punch. What's this about? Your name is listed as the founder and primary funder of a non-profit organization that is under investigation for potential fraud. We believe you may be the victim of identity misuse, but will need to review your involvement. I'll be there tomorrow." I ended the call and just stared at the wall. It had begun, faster than I'd expected. By the time I returned to the city that evening, the media storm had already ignited. News segments ran headlines like "Philanthropist Ethan Carter under fire" and "Carter Charity facing legal scrutiny." The same image kept cycling through me from 2 years ago at a community food drive, handing a bag of groceries to a kid with a forced smile. It had nothing to do with the so-called foundation, but it didn't matter. They had built a lie around my face. That night, I met with Sabrina again at a diner off the freeway. She slid into the booth across from me, already holding a folder. "It's spreading fast," she said quietly. "I saw a press release this morning. They're saying you launched the fund as a personal project to honor your father's legacy. That the paperwork's legit." "Mason's giving interviews. He's blaming me," I said. "Of course he is. It's working." Most people want to believe the face on the flyer. I flipped open the folder. Press clippings, screenshots, social posts, a full timeline of Mason's rollout. They'd even created a fake launch video. And worse, donation links. Real money was involved, real damage. The next day I met with the FBI. The agents were cordial, professional, but I could tell they had already formed a working theory. They asked me when I created the foundation. I told them I didn't. They asked why my name and credit card were on file. I said my brother had forged them. They raised eyebrows but didn't interrupt. They asked why I hadn't reported it sooner, why I hadn't noticed the transactions. I didn't have an answer that sounded convincing, because I'd been locked out of my own accounts, because I had let the noise drown out the signal, because I'd stopped paying attention to everything that wasn't directly on fire. They nodded, wrote everything down, said they'd be in touch. But I saw the skepticism. It didn't matter how polite they were. I was the public face, and the public always needed someone to blame. I left the office and sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. And then came the message that turned everything. It was from Amanda Reyes. She had been my father's executive assistant for nearly 15 years. Quiet, smart, never forgetful. She hadn't been involved since the funeral. I didn't even know if she still lived in Washington. But the subject line said everything. Mason's mistake. Inside was a single PDF, a scanned email from Mason, sent 3 months ago. To a web developer and an accountant. Attached to the message were my bank details, my signature copied from an old HR form. The body of the message said it all. "Use these credentials. We'll transfer the donations through his account first to build legitimacy. He won't notice. I'll handle the press, the timestamp, the IP address, the metadata. It was all there." I stared at the screen, barely breathing. He hadn't just stolen my name. He'd done it with full confidence that I wouldn't stop him. And now I finally had proof that he was wrong. I didn't call ahead. I didn't warn them. I drove straight to the house Mason and Linda shared just outside of Tacoma, the one they kept calling ours like I hadn't grown up there. The gates were open. The driveway was lined with the same rose bushes Dad had planted years ago. They looked perfect. Too perfect. Mason answered the door like he had been expecting a package, not a confrontation. His smile was lazy, amused. I held up my phone, the email from Amanda still open. "You forged my signature. You opened a fake foundation using my name, my account, and my reputation. And now the FBI is involved." He didn't flinch. He actually laughed. "Jesus, Ethan, you're really still stuck on this." Behind him, I heard footsteps. Linda appeared, her expression already annoyed, like she had just been pulled from a lunch she didn't want to share. "What is this? What are you doing here?" I turned the phone toward her. "Did you know your son committed federal fraud?" Mason stepped between us. Voice smooth. "Mom, don't listen to him. He's confused. There was a miscommunication about the paperwork. Ethan gave me verbal authorization months ago. He just doesn't remember." I almost choked. "You're blaming this on memory loss now." Linda crossed her arms, clearly uninterested. "Ethan, if you're upset, that's fine. But coming here and making wild accusations isn't going to solve anything. I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation." I looked at her and realized that something bitter and final. She wasn't just refusing to see the truth. She had chosen not to. Her loyalty wasn't to fairness or facts. It was to the son who told her what she wanted to hear. You'd protect him no matter what, wouldn't you? She didn't answer. I turned and left. Later that day, I visited Reverend Clark. He was an old friend of my father's and one of the few people left in our community who still believed in asking the hard questions. We sat in his small office behind the church, the smell of old wood and coffee lingering in the air. He listened without interruption as I explained everything. The foundation, the forged documents, the email from Amanda, the FBI's involvement. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, eyes dark with concern. I had a feeling something was wrong. Mason came by last week, handed me a check from the foundation. It didn't feel right. Too generous, too fast. And your father, he was never one for spectacle. He gave quietly. This is the opposite of quiet. He nodded. The community potluck is this Saturday. You know how many people come. Business leaders, reporters, even council members. Mason's scheduled to speak. I don't think that's a coincidence. It wasn't. I need to speak after him, I said. Clark didn't hesitate. Then I'll make it happen. As I walked out of the church, something settled in my chest. A quiet resolve. For too long, I'd let Mason and Linda craft their own version of truth. One where I was the bitter son, the jealous brother, the ungrateful heir. But I had the facts now. I had the will, and I had a voice. It was time to use it. The ballroom at the downtown convention center was dressed in navy and silver. The Carter Foods logo projected across every surface like a flag draped over a battlefield. Rows of round tables were filled with business partners, media, longtime employees, and city council members, all gathered for the 30th anniversary celebration of the company my father built. I stood at the edge of the crowd wearing the suit Dad had tailored for me 2 years before he passed. The room buzzed with clinking glasses and rehearsed laughter. On stage, a promotional video looped with testimonials from former interns, factory workers, and executives, all singing praises to the Carter legacy. But the narrative wasn't about legacy anymore. It was about Mason. Linda took the stage first. She looked regal in a tailored white blazer, microphone in hand. Smile perfectly timed. The light softened around her as the room quieted. "Thank you all for being here tonight," she began. 30 years ago, William Carter had a dream. That dream became Carter Foods, and tonight we not only celebrate the past, but we also look toward the future. I felt Mason shift beside her, smoothing the lapels of his jacket. He already knew what was coming. "It is with great pride," Linda continued, "that I announce our next chapter. Mason Carter, my son, will serve as the new face of Carter Foods. He has shown exceptional vision and compassion, launching charitable initiatives, forging new partnerships, and honoring the values of this company." Applause erupted. Cameras flashed. Mason stepped forward and waved with modest bravado, hands pressed together like a humble heir receiving a kingdom. But he never saw the second spotlight come on. From the back of the room, Mr. Grayson walked down the center aisle, a black folder tucked beneath his arm. His presence cut through the applause like a blade. He didn't rush. He didn't smile. Linda's voice faltered slightly when she saw him, then recovered. "Robert, I wasn't aware you were attending tonight." Grayson climbed the steps to the stage with the slow, deliberate confidence of a man holding a loaded gun. He faced the microphone. His voice was calm, but it rang through the room like a gavel. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the interruption. I am Robert Grayson, longtime legal counsel to the late William Carter. I come here tonight on behalf of Mr. Carter himself." He opened the folder. What I hold in my hand is the final and legally binding will of William Carter, signed and dated September 2nd, 2022. Witnessed by 2 attorneys and sealed under fiduciary agreement. This will has been withheld until today at Mr. Carter's explicit request. Mason's expression had gone rigid. Linda stepped forward, hand raised. "Robert, I don't think this is the right." Grayson didn't look at her. Per Mr. Carter's instructions, I am to read the core provisions aloud if and when the integrity of this company or the rightful inheritance of his estate is brought into question. The room had gone entirely silent. He read, "I, William Carter, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare the following to be my final will and testament. I leave full ownership and controlling interest of Carter Foods, Inc. to my son Ethan Carter. I also leave the Lake House property in Coeur d'Alene to Ethan Carter. I leave no corporate assets or property to Mason Carter. Linda Carter is to receive her previously agreed upon personal inheritance separate from the business. Should these provisions be challenged or suppressed, I authorize Robert Grayson to act with full legal authority to ensure their enforcement. Thank you." He closed the folder and stepped aside. The room didn't explode. It deflated. Whispers snaked between tables, a few gasps, heads turned. I stepped forward now through the crowd, my feet firm on the carpet. Linda looked pale. Mason was blinking too quickly, like trying to rewrite the scene in his head. I stood at the foot of the stage, eyes locked on them both. "You lied to everyone. You forged documents, stole money, and erased a man's final wishes. You tried to sell a false story of legacy and service. But the truth has a way of waiting, and tonight it's no longer quiet." Grayson nodded to me once. I looked around the room and saw them watching faces I had known for years. Investors, former colleagues, family friends, people who had once called me a disappointment. Now they saw something else, not revenge, just return. The fallout didn't wait. By Monday morning, the local affiliate stations had picked up the clip of Mr. Grayson reading the will. By afternoon, it had gone national. The story ran with headlines like "The Real Carter Heir Speaks" and "Fraud Scandal Rocks Carter Foods Anniversary Gala." The internet dissected every second of Mason's frozen face and Linda's forced smile. Within 24 hours, they had both gone silent. I watched the reports from my office, not smug, just steady. The first hit came from the Heritage Foundation, a major donor who had publicly supported the Carter Community Fund, the same fake charity Mason built using my identity. They issued a statement condemning the misrepresentation and withdrew all pending donations. Next came the PR firms. One by one, every contract tied to Mason's face evaporated. Endorsements, media appearances, influencer partnerships. All gone. Sponsors didn't like mess, and Mason was now radioactive. A news anchor referred to it as a brand implosion. I called it justice. Linda, meanwhile, issued a statement through her attorney claiming ignorance of the fraud, blaming the chaos on a private family misunderstanding. But few believed her. The donation trail was too clear, the timeline too damning. A non-profit oversight committee began its own review. Quietly, efficiently. The community turned. Reverend Clark spoke publicly about the foundation's lies, calling them a betrayal of trust. Other local leaders followed suit. The church refunded its grant. Food banks that had once praised Mason distanced themselves entirely. By the end of the week, I stepped in front of the same microphone at Carter Foods headquarters. Not to celebrate, but to rebuild. I stood in the atrium, sunlight filtering through the tall windows, dozens of employees gathered around. Some had worked here since I was a teenager. Others were new, they all looked tired, uncertain. But they were still here. "I won't pretend this hasn't been painful," I said. "But it's also been clarifying. My father built this company with purpose, not just for profit, but for people, for community. I paused. Going forward, I intend to honor that. We will restore every misused dollar. And beginning next quarter, Carter Foods will dedicate 10% of net profits to local educational initiatives, starting with youth nutrition and school garden programs. There was no applause, just silence. Then a few nods, a few tears. That was enough. Privately, I met with our finance and legal teams. We froze Mason's access to all remaining corporate accounts. Linda's personal inheritance was placed into a restricted trust pending resolution of fraud claims. I didn't move to press criminal charges. Not yet. Let the investigations run their course. The house Mason lived in was not in his name. Neither was the car. The lawyers moved swiftly. For the first time since Dad died, the balance was shifting. Not because I forced it, because it was already owed. I didn't gloat. I didn't visit. I didn't return their calls. I simply walked back into the office, turned on the lights, and got to work. The week after the public reveal felt both quiet and dense, like walking through fog with weights around my ankles. My days were full of meetings and emails and calls, but my nights were louder. Headlines still buzzed in the background. Legal teams coordinated cleanup. Financial consultants assessed the damage. But underneath it all, something colder settled in. The final unraveling of what used to be my family. Linda didn't go quietly. She scheduled a press conference of her own at a boutique legal office downtown. Dressed in dark gray, her hair pulled tight, she read from a printed statement, with a voice that shook only when she wanted it to. According to her, I had manipulated Mr. Grayson into producing a forged will, that the timing of its appearance was suspicious, that my actions were motivated by jealousy and revenge. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Mr. Grayson, calm as ever, released a formal affidavit within hours. He included timestamps, scanned originals, notarized witness accounts, and a chain of custody that spanned nearly a year. Legal analysts on the news confirmed the will's validity within the day. Linda's accusations vanished from headlines by morning. Mason's spiral was quieter but no less brutal. One by one, his social accounts disappeared. Friends who once tagged him in beach photos and startup pitches now avoided his name like a stain. Influencer circles dropped him. The foundation's board resigned. One podcast even devoted an entire episode to the fall of Mason Carter and how not to fake a legacy. His bank accounts were locked, assets frozen, investigation pending. He sent me a single message through an encrypted app. You got what you wanted. You happy now? I didn't reply. What I wanted wasn't revenge, it was the truth made visible. I met with Mr. Grayson one final time that week to finalize legal boundaries. We sat across from each other in his firm's glass-walled office as he reviewed the updated filings. Going forward, Ethan, you have full controlling interest in Carter Foods. You have no legal obligations to Linda or Mason, financial or otherwise. And emotionally, I asked. He didn't smile. That's up to you. It wasn't hard. I called a staff meeting and made it clear. Effective immediately, Linda and Mason Carter would have no involvement with Carter Foods. No communication, no proxy, no PR. As far as this company is concerned, they are no longer part of our future. There were no cheers, just quiet nods, relief that someone had finally drawn the line. I cleaned out the office Linda once used and found a framed picture of her and Mason from a gala 3 years ago. They looked polished, triumphant, almost happy. I placed it face down in the drawer and locked it. That night I walked through the house alone. My house now. The lake was still, the sky clouded. My father's study remained untouched. I lit a fire and sat in the armchair he used to read in. My chest felt hollow and full all at once. Some people think justice is loud. It isn't. It's quiet, heavy, final, and sometimes the only closure you get is the silence after the storm. That was enough. The email came just after sunrise. A short note from Sabrina, simple and sincere. You didn't choose revenge, you chose the truth. Proud of you. It didn't ask for a reply, and I didn't send one. But I read it twice. I had spent so long buried in firestorms that peace felt suspicious. But something in her words landed deeper than I expected. There had been moments where I could have burned it all down. Times when revenge would have felt easier than restraint, but the only way forward had been through clarity. Later that morning, Amanda Reyes walked into the office with her usual no-nonsense stride. She hadn't changed much, still crisp, direct, all business, but there was a softness to her now, a quiet calm. I never thought I'd walk back into this place, she said, looking around the conference room. Not after how they treated your father. You're not the only one who felt that way, I said. She took a seat across from me. Her resume was unnecessary. I knew exactly what she was capable of. But she laid her proposal on the table anyway. Not a job application, a roadmap. I want to come back, she said, but not to babysit, not to patch holes. I want to help you build the version of Carter Foods your father dreamed of. Not theirs, yours. I didn't hesitate. You're in. She exhaled, and something about that breath told me she'd been holding it for years. We shook hands. COO, effective immediately. By the end of the week, Amanda had already overhauled half our internal systems. Staff morale ticked up. Grievances were resolved. We launched a new initiative called Carter Futures, offering mentorship programs in public high schools. It was exactly the kind of work my father had wanted. One afternoon, I stood in the warehouse loading dock, watching pallets roll into distribution trucks. The rhythm, the scale, it reminded me of childhood Saturdays when Dad brought me here with a clipboard too big for my hands. Back then, I thought running a company meant being the loudest voice in the room. Turns out it meant listening. Sabrina stopped by the office the next week. Not planned. She brought coffee. You look like someone who's sleeping again, she said, sitting across from my desk. I shrugged. Still working on that part. She smiled, but it wasn't the smile of old memories. It was something new. We talked for a while, not about the past, about gardens, travel, the price of eggs, the kind of things people talk about when they've stopped carrying each other's expectations. When she left, I watched her walk down the corridor steady and free. That night, I returned to the lake house. I walked along the dock barefoot, letting the cool wood ground me. The water was still. Clouds hung low, but they didn't threaten. Inside, I opened the old chest in my father's study. Letters, receipts, blueprints. I found a small notebook with the title written in faded ink. Legacy notes. Inside were scribbles, thoughts, lines half finished. Don't chase power, chase impact. Build slow, break greed. If I die with peace, not wealth, I win. I closed the book and sat with it for a while. I had made 1,000 mistakes in the past year. Trusted the wrong people, stayed silent too long. Let myself believe that being good meant being weak. But now I knew better. Peace wasn't weakness, it was earned, and I had earned it. I parked across the street from the old house, the one I grew up in, the one where the worst of it had happened. The paint had faded more than I remembered. The hedges were overgrown, but the shape of it was still familiar, like muscle memory you never quite lose. I crossed the road slowly. The autumn air had turned cold and dry leaves crackled under my shoes. My hand hesitated on the gate. I wasn't here for a confrontation. There was no one left to confront. I just wanted to stand where it all began. The porch creaked under my weight. The front door hadn't changed. Neither had the window to the left, the one where I used to press my nose during storms as a boy. I stepped up to the spot where Linda had once thrown that glass of water at me. The stain was long gone, but I could still feel the sting. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my phone. There was one unread email, sent from a legacy account scheduled by my father. I opened it. "You were ready," 3 words, no punctuation, just him. Even in death, still seeing me more clearly than I sometimes saw myself, I leaned against the frame of the door and let my eyes close. There had been no courtroom battles, no screaming matches, no dramatic confessions, just the steady unfurling of truth, a house of cards collapsing under its own lies. Karma doesn't scream, it knocks when you're home. And I was finally home. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you loved? Did karma ever find its way back to them? Share your story and the city you lived in. I'd love to hear where your truth began. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories every week.